February 14th, Valentine's Day. We're about a month away from the NCAA tournament. And of course, between now and then, there's still a lot to be decided for Houston. I think luckily the Houston Cougars are in a position where it's not about whether they're making the tournament, it's about what seed they will be. As of right now, through games played February 14th, it would seem like, of course, a lot of it's subjective when you look at it across the basketball landscape, but it seems like there's general agreement that the Houston Cougars are one of four teams that have kind of separated themselves from the pack when it comes to potentially getting a number one seed. And I think you can put them in a class with Kansas, Alabama, and Purdue. I know there was one outlet that had Texas out there after they lost to Texas Tech, and it kind of slid back
I'm
down
going
from
to
that
Kansas too.
aspect.
I think Baylor is going to be starting to get some recognition.
Baylor's clicking.
Yep.
Yeah, Baylor's clicking. But I think as of now, I think those four teams kind of have the most seed. It looks like Purdue might be stumbling a little bit. So that'll be interesting to see if they can turn it around in the next few weeks. But keeping it local from a Houston Cougars perspective, I think the key for them to being able to lock down a number one seed is relatively, from a standpoint where we're just talking, is relatively simple. Obviously, it's much more harder on the court. But I think the biggest thing that UH has to do is avoid bad losses, which it sucks because in the conference or in the American Athletic Conference, from a national perspective, really a lot of national pundits would consider any loss against American Athletic Conference foes. I would argue maybe accept a road loss to Memphis as a bad loss. But what do you think needs to happen from now until the end of the conference postseason tournament for Houston to be able to lock down a number one seed?
If these so-called experts watched any basketball, then they would know that I would agree. There's only three bad losses left on Houston's schedule in the non-conference: SMU, East Carolina, and Wichita State. How can you say that a Tulane team, if they lose to that team, would be a bad loss, and they beat Memphis twice? Who beat Auburn, who beat I believe it was Texas A&M, and so I don't think, in my eyes, they would be viewed as a bad loss if that were to happen. And so I think that even if they drop one of those games against a Tulane or against Memphis, whether it be at home or on the road, I still think they'll do enough to earn a number one seed, and taking into account if they win the conference tournament. So I think the number one seed is probably almost solidified. I think there are a grace period between Houston, as far as if they suffer another loss. I don't think, like we talked about in different episodes, whether it's on Let's Raise Cougars or our podcast, that Houston has to go undefeated or maybe one loss to get that number one seed. I think they've earned a respect during this season between these so-called experts who put out all these different mock seeds and all this other bracketology and all that crap, I would say. That they realized Houston is one of the best teams. And I think saying that Alabama beat Houston, that's why they're number one. And I think that goes to the respect of Houston. And
do you have a problem with that?
I don't have a problem with that at all. Not at all. Not one bit, because they beat Houston on the road. That's probably the most impressive win from any team in college basketball. Battle back to win that game. Then you look at what they're doing in the SEC. They're the number one team in that conference.
Undefeated at this point.
Yeah, I'm not mad at that at all. I think that's a good assessment. They beat Houston at Houston, so I'm not mad at that. But I think Houston, man, just keep stacking up the wins. I don't think it's a bad loss if they lose. I think, like I'm saying, East Carolina, Wichita State, and SMU, those are bad losses. If they lose against one of those three teams, I think they might fall out that number one seed spot.
Interesting that, like you said, Tulane maybe not be, you wouldn't put it in that category of a bad loss, but it being a home loss, I would see that from a national perspective, they certainly would put a lot of dirt in Houston's eyes if they were to lose that game. I agree with you in terms of Memphis. I think I found it interesting. A lot of it is subjective depending on whatever outlet you see, but there's a lot of consensus that Memphis is kind of around a bubble team in the NCAA tournament, which I found interesting. Like you mentioned, they have good wins. They beat Auburn. They beat Texas A&M, which has been trending in the right direction, and they're actually ranked in the coaches poll, this last poll that came out on Monday. So the Aggies are a team that are heading in the right direction. The Tigers have those good quality wins, even against Alabama, kind of similar to Houston. They narrowly lost to the Crimson Tide, which, I mean, like we talked about, arguably Alabama is the best team in the country right now. And if you look at it from the polls, they are the best team in the country right now. But keeping on it from the conference postseason tournament, do you think that Houston, again, you said they don't necessarily have to win out, but do you think that they have to get at least to the championship game? What could the conference tournament be like for the Cougars?
I think if they win out the regular season, win the conference tournament, they're probably going to bid for a number one overall seed. I
Oh
think
yeah, for sure.
I think so. And not just the number one seed, I think the number one overall seed. And so I think they're going to put that much stock into it, because some of these other teams like Alabama, they still got to play the likes of Tennessee and different schools who they're going to be challenged. But if they get through their schedule and win their conference tournament, then they might be the number one seed. But if Houston just take care of business, and I expect some of these other teams to lose a game or two, because you look at Alabama, they went to an OU team on the road in Oklahoma, in Norman, and got blew out, but still doesn't take away overall what they've done collectively for the season and the schedule that they put together. And so do they consider that a bad loss? Maybe no, because Oklahoma's in the Big 12, but they're not having a good season. But if you look at Tulane, who's beat the Memphis team twice at Memphis and at home, they still don't get the respect. So I don't know what these people, I don't think they're watching every team. They're just going on the narrative behind the programs without actually watching the games. And so that's why I don't really like too much taking that stuff into account, because and ultimately it doesn't matter once you get into the tournament. I don't care what your seed is, 1 or 2. We've seen Cinderella, quote unquote Cinderella teams make long runs, and people are surprised because of the seed, the number next to their team name. And so, man, I don't really put much stock into it. But I think for Houston, they win the conference tournament, win out, they probably be in the running for overall number one seed.
Yeah, John, look at it in years past. When you look at the quote-unquote Power 5 conference, I know it's a little bit different in basketball, but look at the Big Ten. The past few seasons, they've had multiple teams make it to the NCAA tournament, and a lot of them end up losing in the first or second rounds of the NCAA tournament. It just goes to show how crazy college basketball is. Now, focusing on the Houston Cougars perspective specifically, they've had about a week off after their last game. They played Tulsa last Wednesday. They won't play again until February 16th. At SMU, which from Houston's perspective, this is pretty much the last break that they have until whenever their season ends, whenever that may be, come March, or from Houston perspective, even April. But from what they've been able to take account, it's been a good chance for them to recover their bodies and gear up for their final stretch. Now, Jamal Shead spoke to reporters after practice yesterday, and really one of the messages that he reiterated, both he and Sasser kind of said similar things, and really the main gist of it is their main focus is taking it one game at a time, not necessarily getting caught up in what do they need to do to be able to secure a number one seed? What do they quite frankly, they don't care about rankings or anything like that. It's much more about living in the moment and taking it one game at a time. For you, what are you looking for in this Houston Cougars team down the stretch?
I'm looking for them, like Jamal said, to play more consistently as a team. There's been stretches where Jarris has had 3 or 4 consecutive really good games. There have been stretches where Marcus had 2 or 3 stretches of really good games. Tremont, Jamal, J1. So I think that next step is putting it all together as a team. I allow the women's team, put it all together and play that high level of basketball as a team, where one person might have a great game, but you have everyone else having good games. Like we have a game recently where stats don't really tell the full story of having a good game. And I'm not one of those persons who look at the stats and be like, oh, he had a good game because he had X amount of points, like a lot of people do. But if they can have a game where you have multiple players in double figures, and not to, like I said, it means that have a good game, but it's just more consistently offensively and overall, that would make the threat of Houston offensively a more potent team. And so I think that's the next step for them as they wind down the stretch of these games, just continue to play well together, gel together, but overall from everyone to kind of have those good games as a team, but not just 1 or 2 players. It's hard to say, because when you have such a talent like they have, I mean, in a game of basketball, it's a make or miss game. I mean, everyone isn't going to make their shots all the time. And so that's a lot to ask for. But when you have the options that they have and the depth that they have, I think they can do it. I mean, it doesn't have to be scoring, like I said, but you need to score the basketball. That's how you win. I mean, you can stop the other team all you want, but if you're not putting the ball in the hoop, what does it matter?
Right, and I think that's a great point that you brought up in regards to Jamal Shedd's post-game comments, which, by the way, if you do want to check them out, you can do so on the Pawd Slama Jama YouTube channel. Just go ahead and check out the other videos in the channel. But, yeah, like, that's a great point. It's so far this season, and it's something with Jamal Shedd that you reference. They've had Jarvis Walker had a good game. They've had Jamal Shedd had a good game. Marcus Sasser's had a good game. There hasn't really been a stretch where all of them, you're looking at it from a starting lineup perspective, where all of them are kind of hitting on the same game, which I think that's something that's really, really exciting from a Houston fan perspective, because I don't know if there's any team out there that could beat this team if they are all hitting on cylinders. It's a big what if, because I think, especially when you look at those top teams, a lot of teams can say that, but from Houston specifically, like I said, they have so many weapons, they're really potent.
Yeah, and they literally have players that can beat you with their offense. And so, I mean, it's a lot to ask for, but I agree with what you said 100%. If they're all clicking at the same game at the same time, then Houston probably most likely is going to be unbeatable, because we know the defense is going to travel. We know they're going to have that energy. They're going to play with relentlessness to win the game, and specifically defending the basketball. But offensively, if they can continue to be more complete, more consistent, as a team, not just a starting five. You come in, then you have Terrence getting back to what he showed that he can do at Oregon. He's playing more consistently and knocking down shots and continue to defend, and rebound, and doing all those things. Then you take into account Emmanuel coming in, playing his role, knocking down shots, defending, taking charges, what he's been doing a great job with recent. Then JVA, like just all those different elements of the team, Reggie. And so you put all that in together, and they all do that at the same time. Houston's going to be hard to beat, man. They're going to be hard to deal with.
Real quickly, and on the topic of Terrence Arsenault, Kelvin Sampson did speak to reporters on Tuesday morning. They're recording this. We're reporting this in the afternoon, but Kelvin spoke Tuesday morning. Didn't give an update in regards to an injury update on Terrence Arsenault. During his radio show last night, on Monday night, he said that Terrence Arsenault was at practice. He worked on individual work. He did a lot of shooting, focused specifically on shooting. It's unsure if he's going to play on Thursday at SMU after he rolled his ankle last week against Tulsa, though. Certainly that's going to be something to keep an eye on heading in the next few games for Houston, but it doesn't sound like it's something that's expected to be a long-term issue for Terrence Arsenault.